Let's talk about the best method for solving any major problem in your business. If you are a business owner, right now you have problems in your business, the skeletons in the closet, and some of those are very big skeletons. So if you have major problems in your business, those problems have to be solved. And in this episode, I want to break down the best method for solving those problems. This method was created by some of the smartest people in the history of humanity. This has evolved over time. It is time tested. It is a proven way to solve problems like this. And it works perfectly for freelancers. But here's how most freelancers solve problems. You have a problem, you ignore it. That's the first way. If you don't ignore it, you have a problem, you hear about some kind of idea, you want to try it out. I'm putting that in air quotes, you want to try it out. And then you just kind of move on with life when that didn't immediately solve the problem. Or you kind of half implemented it, those half-built bridges. And when you solve problems this way, those problems start to compound. Because again, I'm using solved in air quotes because if you ignored it, you obviously didn't solve it. And if you're the dabbler, like I talked about a second ago, where you're doing these half-built bridges, then not only did you not solve the problem, you also wasted a bunch of time dabbling. So it's in some ways worse than the ignorer. So not only do you have a lack of leads for your business, not only do you suck at sales in your business, not only does your pricing suck because you're too scared to raise your rates in your business, you're also slow at fulfillment because of perfectionism. And you hate your clients because you let them walk all over you. These are all solvable problems. Every single one of those things I just mentioned are solvable problems. Many people have some or all of these problems in their business right now, and you're either ignoring them or you're just dabbling and half building bridges to the solutions, and you're never actually fully solving these problems. Now, this sounds really stupid and condescending, but it's worth repeating here. If the problem isn't solved, it won't go away. It doesn't magically solve itself. That's why I hate word of mouth as the main source of clients for freelancers, because it lulls you into this false sense that the problem has been solved. Or this feast or famine, when you finally are feasting again, that famine's not going to come again. And then when it inevitably does, because you're just relying on word of mouth that you do not control, now you start to realize, oh, I actually have a problem. When the famine comes back again, and now you're back in the same exact position you were before, where you have more month than money at this point. Remember, we're talking about a problem-solving framework in this episode. So when you don't solve the problems, that's when those things start to compound. They start to stack on top of each other, one after another, until you hate your business. So in order to end this compounding effect of our problems stacking on top of each other, we have to start snowballing our problems. And to snowball our problems, it means just solving the biggest one first. Throughout this episode, I really want you to take what's the number one problem, that big, hairy problem you know you have, that first big one on the start of our snowball right now. I want you to keep that top of mind as we talk through this episode, because it's going to be very helpful for you to have that top of mind as we think through this framework. So what is the framework? What is the big thing I've been building up? It is the scientific method. It sounds really like a letdown when I say it out loud, but the scientific method has been around for centuries. It has evolved over time. It has been created by tons of smart people, way smarter than me and you. It is used at very high levels for solving all sorts of problems in all different mediums, and it can be utilized by freelancers to solve the problems of your business. So in this episode, I'm going to break down the scientific method as it pertains to freelancers. This is a proven, time-tested approach to solving problems, like actually solving them, as opposed to ignoring or just half-built bridges, right? And when we actually solve the problems, we can start that snowball. So if you haven't heard of this podcast before, hello, I'm Brian Hood. This is the Six Figure Creative Podcast. This podcast is for freelancers who offer creative services, and you'll want to make more money from your creative skills without selling your soul. If that sounds like you, you're on the right spot. For my returning listeners, welcome back. We are 337 episodes into this podcast at this point, so you know who I am if you've been listening for a long time. Now, just as a reminder, I'm about to outline the scientific method and how it, again, pertains to freelancers for solving problems. Think through your number one problem you have right now, the big thing that keeps you up at night, right? The number one thing. Don't worry about this process for small, tiny problems because it's likely overkill. But we're talking about those big problems, the things that can really affect your business in a good or a bad way, if it's solved or not solved. This is what this method is great at. So if you're watching on YouTube right now, I've got the image of the actual scientific method up here. It's just a random image I found. There's a bunch of different small variations and tweaks of the scientific method, but this is the one I like the most because it's simple, it's straightforward, it's easy to understand. If you're listening right now, no worries. I'll explain each of the steps to you. You can also go to the show notes page at sixfigurecreative.com/337. And the image will be somewhere on the page if you scroll around. One of the first things you notice about this is it is a circle. It is a 6-step circle. And that's because for the scientific method to work, it is coming at it with the approach that it will not be solved the first go around. It is an iterative approach, meaning you go through this loop one time and you have started the solution. Based on what you have learned, we're going to go through the loop again and again and again, because sometimes solving really large problems is more than just one thing. And I think that's why so many people fail to solve the big problems in their life or in their businesses, is because they go through the loop one time, the problem wasn't solved, they give up because they're frustrated, and they just assume that that's how life is going to be for them. So let's talk through these 6 steps. I'm not even going to give you the overview because it's just a bunch of gibberish and scientific method terms. I want to really simplify this pertaining to you and the number one problem that you have in your mind right now. The first step is observation/question. What is the observation we've made in our business, or what's the question that we have? Basically, what is the problem you're trying to solve, or what's the big unanswered question about your business that you have right now? A really good place to start is go back to episode 332, where I talked about the 7 must-track metrics that will make you more money in 2025. In that, the first 4 I talk about, the core 4 metrics are how many marketing leads did you generate, the number of people who might be a good fit, but they haven't expressed direct interest in hiring you. So maybe it's a lead magnet you gave them. Some people do free communities online using school or a Facebook group or something like that. How many marketing leads did you generate? The second metric is how many sales leads did you generate, aka inquiries, people that have directly expressed interest in hiring you. The third is how many clients did you close based on those inquiries. And the fourth is what's the average annual client value? What's one client worth to you over the next 12 months? That's the 4 core metrics that you track in your business that can really be boiled down to how much money will you make in a year. If you generate 100 marketing leads, how many of those can you turn into sales leads? Can you turn 5 to 10 of those into sales leads? Of the 5 to 10 sales leads you get or inquiries you get, can you turn 2 to 5 of those into clients? Are the clients worth $2,000 to $5,000 each? If so, you have a good business, right? The problem is most freelancers businesses don't look like that. Most freelancers businesses do not generate new leads. Most freelancers businesses don't have the correct average annual client value for their niche or their industry. And so you have the pick of the litter here. Any of these will do. It's most likely, in many of these cases, going to be a lead generation issue for most freelancers. That's the good place to start. What's the number one big problem that you are struggling with right now in your business that, if solved, makes the rest of your business easier to run? It could be, by the way, you just don't know what your metrics are. That's a question you have or a problem that you have. And so if that's your problem and you're like, I have no idea what my numbers are or my metrics are in any of these things, that's the number one problem to solve first. Because with better data, you can come to better conclusions. And with better conclusions, you can make better decisions. That's the first step in this, again, circle, this cycle that we're going to go through multiple times. Observation question. What's the problem you want to solve? Number 2 is research the topic area or just research in general. What are your options for solving this problem? There can be many ways to tackle a problem. And this is where this podcast can be handled. This is where other resources that are out there, like Christo's The Future Podcast, wonderful resource for another view. Like he has a completely different view of certain areas in business. He has a lot more experience in certain areas of business than I do. I consider myself a client acquisition expert. I think he is a wonderful systems and operator when it comes to team and numbers and metrics and pricing and all those things. Like he's really good at what he does. I'm really good at what I do. And between the two of us, you can learn a lot. There's also Alex Hormozy. There's also plenty of other influencers to go to when it comes to how can I solve this one problem. There's also ChatGPT, not a bad place to start when it comes to brainstorming. Typing in Mr. GPT or Mrs. GPT. I have this problem in my business. I would like you to help me brainstorm different solutions to how I could tackle this. My business looks like this. It is a web design business. I build websites for $5,000 to $10,000. Just so you have context, what could I do? That's a form of research. Don't take it for gospel because AI can hallucinate. It can give you bad suggestions. But generally for brainstorming, I love ChatGPT. It's a good place to start somewhere. And then you can take those ideas to other areas and cross-reference and listen to other resources and listen to this podcast, the other 336 episodes that we have to find potential solutions to your problem. I'm telling you, in 337 episodes now, I've talked about every damn topic there is. I've run out of ideas. I'm now talking about the same things in different approaches now. So something in your business, you've probably had the solution on this podcast or a potential solution for you in this podcast. But one important thing to think about when it comes to problems that you're solving is what's the actual root cause of the problem? Because many times you can solve a surface level issue thinking that that's going to solve all the problems. And you think you've solved it, but you actually haven't because the root cause was never solved. Example could be my average annual client value sucks. I'm not charging enough, right? You do the 5 whys exercise. It's a wonderful exercise. Why number 1 is why is my average annual client value so low? It's because my pricing is bad. Why number 2, why is my pricing bad? It's because every time that I talk to a client, they beat me down on pricing. Why number 3 is why don't you stick to your current rates? Answering that question is because I've had 3 sales calls in the last 2 months. And so I feel like I have to close every client. And because of that, I'm willing to bend on my pricing in order to just land the deal because I have to close it. And then the question is, why do you have to close it? Why do you only have 3 sales calls in the last 3 months? Because you have no marketing leads. You've done no top of mind awareness. You haven't followed up with anyone in months, right? Like all these other problems in your business that you can start to solve. And then it becomes something else. It becomes a follow-up systems issue. It becomes a lead generation issue. But this is an important thing to do is the root cause analysis, the 5 whys exercise, before you start diving in and solving this problem that isn't really the problem, right? So that's step number 2 is research. So we've observed the problem or we have a question that we're trying to figure out or we have a problem that we're trying to solve. Number 2, we've researched first, is this the actual root cause Is this the thing we should solve first? And then if it is, what are my potential solutions? Once you know the root cause and you have a good idea of how you can tackle it, number 3 is we get to hypothesis. What's the hypothesis here? Based on what you know, what's the best chance for success of all the potential solutions that we have out there? And it may be that, hey, my hypothesis is I have plenty of people that I'm talking to on sales calls, consult calls, whatever you want to call them. They're sales calls. I have plenty of people that I'm talking to, but my average annual client value still isn't where I think it should be. So my hypothesis is I can raise my rates. And if I do, I will make more money per client and it'll still be better for my business. Even if I work on fewer projects overall, it'll still be better for my business. That's the hypothesis, right? Number 4 is test. What is the best way to actually test this? You come up with a hypothesis for this problem. Now, how can we actually test it? What number or what metric tells us whether this test was a success or a failure? Going back to the pricing example, how can we best test this pricing change, whether it was good or bad? What's the best metric? I know in this one, it's easy math. This is why I picked this one for this episode. It's easy math. What's my earnings per sales call? I'll spell it out for you. If you had 10 sales calls and 5 closed clients at your old price, which is $2,000, and you made 10 grand in a month. Great. Wonderful. 10 grand. Now it's the price to beat. 10 sales calls is a good amount to have in a month. 5 closed clients, 50% close rate. Awesome. $2,000 per client. But 10 grand's not bad, right? But you're like, I need some of my time back. So I'm going to try to raise my rates. What's our baseline? What's our earnings per call? 10 calls, 5 closed clients, $10,000. That's $1,000 earned per call. That's our baseline that we're going to be measuring everything else against, right? Again, better data allows you to make better decisions. Let's say we raise our prices up to $4,000 now, and we have a similar 10 calls in a month. You only close 3 of those clients, but they're at $4,000 each. That means you made 12 grand in a month. So that's $1,200 per call. 10 calls, $12,000 made, $1,200 per call. This is the simplest math you can do. $12,000 earned divided by 10 calls done equals $1,200 earned per call. You're like, okay, this is going great. I'm going to raise my prices again. 10 more calls, $5,000 per client is what you're trying to get now, but you only closed 2 clients. Now we're down to $1,000 per call again. Still actually way better than the first one, because now to earn $10,000, you only have to do 2 clients versus the 5 you had before. So you're still way better off time-wise, but you're not quite as well off on an earnings per call, a pure revenue basis, as you were when you were at $4,000. So that might be the sweet spot. In any business, there is something called price elasticity. And that is, there is a price point in which you can keep going up and it is better for your business. Your earnings per call will keep going up. And then there's a point where it snaps and it's pretty abrupt and it'll just nosedive after that point. So it's important for you to figure out where that point is in your business. That can be very difficult if you're a really low volume, high value business. It can take months or a year or more to test this sort of stuff. It's worth doing, but there may be better tests to do in your business if that's the case. But this really works well for you if you are a either medium volume or especially a high volume business where you have a lot of projects you're working on. There's a lot more room for testing. To properly test something, it really does take more than 10 calls at a time. Like, you shouldn't just be basing this off of just a 10 call test. You can start to bump rates up and track that metric over time and let that be one of the experiments that you're trying out. But that's just one example of this. Again, I'm not telling you this is the one for you to run. I'm trying to give you an example of how are we going to test this? What's the measurement we're looking at to say whether this was a success or a failure, so that you understand how a proper test should be done in a scientific method. And that kind of leads to the question of how long do we need to gather this data? If you're looking for scientific accuracy, there's something called statistical significance, right? And that is based on how large of a change we had in the data. How many tests do we need to run, or how many cycles of this do we need to run? The bigger the change, the fewer we need to do. For example, in the sales calls, if you had a massive change in your call value, you need to do fewer calls overall for you to say this is a statistically significant change in data here. But if the change is very small, we need to do a lot more volume and tests and numbers for us to actually come to a real conclusion, because there's something called false positives. And that is in data where we can say that someone is a winner or a loser in something in a test that we're doing. And then we find out that we chose the wrong one. In a split test, this is really straightforward, where like on a landing page, we're trying to say version A of the landing page versus version B of the landing page. We change the headline, we change the button colors, whatever. And version A, it looks like the winner, but we only had 100 page views. It was only a winner by like 2 extra opt-ins. That's not a statistically significant change. Therefore, you'd have to run that test for a long time. So this could get to the point where you determine there is no great way to find statistical significance here because it's going to take way too long. And if that's the case, you can make a gut decision here. Do you feel like it's a test worth doing? Can we get proper data at least to make a gut decision? And then based on the feeling that you had, it may be that we can't come to a real statistically significant decision on what's our perfect price point before the elasticity drops off, right? We might not be able to come to that perfectly. However, you might say that directionally, this is where I want to go. I'm okay with not having a perfect answer here, but I'm definitely okay with taking on fewer projects for the same amount of money, right? If you're taking on 3 projects for 10 grand instead of 4 projects or 5 projects for 10 grand, you're okay with that, even if your earnings per call might be slightly lower. In a perfect world, everything's statistically significant, meaning there's enough data there to say that this is statistically the correct move. But in real business, we don't always have that luxury. So how long do we need to gather this data? And then the other big question is, how can we actually gather this data? Do you have it stored somewhere? Is it going to be in Google Analytics? Is it going to be in your Facebook ads platform? Is it in your CRM? How are you accessing this data? Because we need to make sure we find what's our benchmark or our baseline over the past 6, 12 months, or however much data you have. And then how long are we running this experiment? And then what date we're going to analyze the data again and figure out, is this actually better or not? And that leads us to number 5, and that's actually analyzing the data. So just kind of recap here, going back to the image that I have on the screen, we've observed our business. We've come to a conclusion our problem is our average annual client value is not high enough. We've researched the topic area. We've looked at all the different areas we could do things. We could raise rates. We could try to get clients to come back to us more often. We could have another service to sell them, whatever the case is here. Our hypothesis is the easiest thing to do is just raise rates. Now we're going to test with an experiment, and we're going to raise our rates by 20%, 30%, 50%. And our hypothesis was, if we raise it by X%, our earnings per call is going to go up or stay unchanged. If it stays unchanged, it's actually good. It means we are earning the same amount of money. We're just not working as much. And that's wonderful. You don't have as much fulfillment on the back end. And now we're getting to step number 5, and that's analyzing the data. This is where we actually look at all the numbers to figure out what actually happened in our experiment. This can and should just be simple math, like I mentioned earlier, subtraction, multiplication, division, addition. It can also be really complex spreadsheets with pivot tables and custom formulas and all this complex stuff. The bigger the business gets, the more complex this can get. But luckily for freelancers, this stuff's all pretty basic. Just 5th grade math is all you need. If you've done everything to this point, it's not too difficult to crunch the numbers here, to analyze the data, to look at all the numbers and figure out, is this actually an improvement or not? Has this actually solved the problem or not? And that's where we get to number 6, the final step in the scientific method here. And that is report conclusions, which sounds like what? Report conclusions? It just basically means determine what the data means. What is the conclusion here? What have we figured out? Is it inconclusive? Is it like, I don't know. Maybe we need to run the experiment longer. Maybe we need to make adjustments and try it again. Sometimes it was successful. You're done solving the problem. There's other problems to solve in your business now, right? Sometimes the test was a failure. It was just like, this didn't solve it. It didn't move the needle. No matter what happened in this process, you have gained something incredibly valuable, and that is data. You have more information than you started with. And this is where the cycle repeats itself. This is the iterative process of problem solving. This is why the scientific method exists. It's that when you run an experiment, it's not a guaranteed success. Sometimes we just learn enough to get to the next potential solution. So now with this more information, we have determined, you know what, raising my rates wasn't the right move. I think, based on what I'm seeing, that we are at the top of what we can charge in our market. Great, wonderful place to be. How else can I increase my average annual client value? It might be that you decide to pivot to a different customer avatar, one with a higher price threshold that they're willing to pay, a higher willingness to pay. Maybe it's that you now have more services. You have the same client that you want to sell other services to. If you're web design, maybe you need to do branding design as well. Maybe you need to do website maintenance and hosting. Maybe you need to figure out how to do copywriting or get a copywriting partner, whatever. Again, the sky's the limit. There's tons of ways to increase average annual client value. Actually, matter of fact, we have a whole episode on this just a couple episodes ago, episode 335, where I talk about my favorite 7 ways to make every client worth more. Those are, again, 7 different experiments to run. If you're trying to figure out how to do this, or 7 different potential experiments to run. You shouldn't do all of them, but the problem is the same. We're still trying to solve this very specific problem. And you just repeat. I figured this out naturally after working with hundreds of clients. We have a lot of clients we work with on paid ads. And paid ads is a really interesting place to determine that this is the actual method we are doing without even realizing it. And then I realized we're actually just doing the scientific method all the time. So we actually ended up coming up with our own kind of method for testing ads with our clients. And that is, define the problem or question. What is the thing we're trying to solve here? It's generating leads, right? The step 2 in the scientific method for our paid ad stuff is collaborate with a coach, work with us to actually come up with what hooks or what angles or what things we need to change to make the ads convert better. Create new ads. We usually do 3 at a time. So we test in batches of 3, run the ads, gather the data, submit the data to the coach. And then we are just doing the exact same thing over and over again. Define the question or problem. The problem is our click-through rate is too low. Collaborate with a coach to figure out how can we increase click-through rate, create the new ads, right? And just repeat the cycle over and over and over again until we hit benchmarks that we're trying to hit. And the goal with any client we work with is at least a 5-to-1 return on ad spend. And that is where $1 spent, $5 is out. You can go through this entire cycle in less than a week. We're just repeating the same thing every week with clients. And I find myself, explaining over and over again that we're basically following the scientific method. And not only did this make the process smoother and easier, it also set expectations with clients and anyone doing any problem solving that it has not solved the first test. I even set the expectation, your first 3 test ads will not work. They will fail. It is only there to gather data so that we can make better decisions moving forward. Because again, with better data means better solutions. So whatever your problem is right now, whatever big problem you're trying to solve, the scientific method or some variation of it is a wonderful process to use to solve the problem. If you're trying to do research right now, like for example, lead generation or client acquisition in general is a problem in your business, I want to make sure you knew that we have a free client acquisition toolkit that you can download. Just go to sixfigurecreative.com/toolkit. That toolkit has a ton of great resources for research when it comes to client acquisition. If you're trying to build out your client acquisition machine, go there first as a first step for your research to start this problem solving loop. Again, that's sixfigurecreative.com/toolkit, 100% free. It's awesome. I think I've had an ad running for this toolkit for like 2.5 years now, has over 1 million views, and it just continues to generate leads for us. So the irony of using this toolkit as a lead generation tool is not lost on me. Irony, or is it coincidence? I don't know. Either way, the resource is helpful and it's proven because I have not turned that ad off in over 2.5 years. Go check that out, sixfigurecreative.com/toolkit. Download it, use it as a research tool for planning out your own problem solving loop. And I can't wait to see what you all do with it. That is it for this episode of the Six Figure Creative Podcast. I will see you all next week. Goodbye.